Tonight, you're not opening a thriller or scrolling a feed you understand. You're opening a book that has nodded politely at 5 centuries of readers and told none of them what it means. Before you fall asleep, you'll sit with a manuscript that behaves like a language but refuses to introduce itself. Turn pages that bloom with plants no botanist can quite name, and listen while scholars, machines, and very patient guesses circle the same lines again and again without landing. You won't solve it. That's the favor it does you. Vellum rustles like dry leaves in a room that has chosen one small pool of lamplight. A quill, somewhere in memory, scratches a line that no one living understands. The letters lean and loop as if they were sure of every word. Only the readers hesitate. A candle tunnels the page with a narrow gold cave of light, and in that cave the script goes on talking calmly to itself, unbothered by the centuries or by your puzzled breathing. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next soft rustle of pages will remember you there, half awake, while the book continues its quiet, fluent silence, because tonight's story doesn't promise an answer. It simply invites you to sit beside a mystery that knows how to wait. You might not expect a small book to sound like a room, but the Voynich Manuscript does. It wrestles like a careful conversation, the kind where the pages speak in loops and benches and tiny gallows, and the listener nods without understanding. A candle beside the binding makes a gold tunnel through the vellum, and the letters do not mind. They have been waiting 5 centuries. They can wait a few more minutes while you settle your blanket and decide which side of the pillow is the cool one. The book enters the 20th century from a quiet college outside Rome. A chest opens. Inside it, stacks of medieval volumes sleep like loaves. A Polish bookseller named Wilfred Voynich reaches in and lifts a small codex bound in tired calf. The air around the book is the sort that accepts whispers. Mondragon's walls have heard plenty, Jesuits trading one rare text for another, a benefactor insisting that wisdom needs a window, a rector suggesting that it would be nice to have a new roof before the next thunderstorm. The codex leaves with Voynich and rides trains. It rides steamers. It meets librarians who introduce it to soft brushes. Each person the book meets produces a label, the way polite people produce handshakes. Voynich MS 408, one tag will eventually say, when the book finds a steady chair in New Haven in a glass case that doesn't argue. But for now, the book is just something Wilfred can't stop showing people at dinner, even though dessert is getting cold and the candle drips onto the saucer with a slow, sermon-like patience. Open it, and the first surprise is how confident the script is. Not a nervous cipher, not a raspy scratch of concealment. It walks from left to right with the composure of a clerk who knows where the ink lives. The letters loop and arch. They form families. They tidy themselves into neat lines. There are no commas to interrupt them, no periods to send them to bed. A reader looking for a brake pedal will not find one. There is only the soft roll of tokens, like pebbles poured from one hand to another while someone says, there, to a restless thought. Radiocarbon will eventually lean over and say, in a very calm voice, early 15th century for the vellum, give or take. The book nods. It does not answer questions, but it always nods. The pictures are even kinder than the text. Plants unfold in greens that look almost right, the way you might remember a leaf drawn by memory at night. A root turns into a bottle, which is not unusual if you have ever watched a pharmacist arrange glass. A stem divides exactly where a label wants to point, though the label points to nothing we can read. In some sections, stars and moons orbit in wheels that would make an astrologer sigh happily into his ledger. The star wheels are connected by small tubes as if they were arranged by an engineer who had been asked to build a map of influence and chose plumbing. And then there are the baths. Little pools, round as teacups, connected by pipes. Little figures waiting in them with the matter-of-fact expression of people who have discovered that warm water is an idea worth repeating. A Renaissance reader would have called the whole thing balneological, which is a very good word to say slowly as you turn a page. Every owner the book passes through tries the same ritual. Catalog first, because that makes the anxiety sit down. Compare next, because science enjoys company. Guess, because there is no rule against it. Give up for a while, because dinners must be eaten and roofs repaired. Then pass it on. The manuscript never corrects anyone. It is far too polite. Yet it does keep a kind of diary in pencil around the margins, little notes in Latin and later in modern hands, the way a wall keeps the silhouettes of old furniture. One note mentions a philosopher rumored to be inside the book. Another note insists that a magician was once within 10 feet of it. A third note is just a number, which is the best kind of humility in a manuscript. Linguists arrive with their toolboxes. Zip's Law comes in, takes off its shoes, and steps quietly around the text. The law nods. The frequency of words behaves like words in honest languages do, with some tokens common and some rare, and the curve dropping in that familiar way that reassures the mathematician's breakfast. Entropy sits beside Zips and says in a low voice that the text shows structure tighter than a monkey at a typewriter can manage, but looser than a monk chanting Latin. A statistician measures the spacing of certain letter groups and discovers, to her sleepiness and delight, that they prefer to lean on the left side of lines, like shy guests hovering near the kitchen door. It feels like language smiling at the camera and then stepping behind a tree. Cryptographers sharpen their pencils. Some suggest a cipher, the kind that hides a real language in a costume. Others sigh and say that if it is a hoax, it is the kind of hoax that works too hard, like a juggler practicing alone in a barn for 30 years. A few voices propose a private grammar, a constructed tongue invented by someone who enjoyed inventing grammar the way other people enjoy arranging drawers. There are theories with little tails, that Roger Bacon wrote it in a burst of experimental Latin, that John Dee acquired it from an angel who had a librarian's sense of humor, that a steganographic scheme hides another text the way a rug hides a stain. Radiocarbon simply repeats its friendly date for the vellum and adds, after a pause, that ink is hard to date and patience is a virtue. Everyone agrees patience is a virtue and then asks the same questions, but more softly. The pictures tempt historians to do what they love best, make labels. A plant must be this plant. A star must be this star. One leaf is declared to be a sunflower with a speech impediment. Another leaf prefers to be a lily that has dreamed of engineering school. A root that curls like a sleeping cat is identified as a known species which, if you squint and live at altitude, could grow that way. Enthusiasts hold the book up to the mirror of old herbals and watch resemblances swim into place. Almost, the book says, with perfect courtesy. Almost is a very good word. Meanwhile, some late medieval scribe, unnamed and unhurried, left us two different voices in the writing, as if two hands shared a desk and a pot of ink. A 20th century analyst calls them A and B, because letters are good at standing in for people who may have wanted to be left alone. A writes more softly, B writes with a slightly different rhythm, and both seem to know exactly where the line should end. If you follow the curvature of the lines with your finger carefully, you will feel as if you are tracing the habits of two walkers on the same path, one who likes to look up at clouds and one who leans into the wind. Transcribers invent a helpful alphabet for the shapes so computers can whisper over them. EVA, they call it an extensible Voynich alphabet, which is exactly what you would name a tool you want to stretch without breaking. Computers politely count everything. They examine which tokens prefer each other's company. They discover that some syllable-like clusters tend to sit at the start of words, others prefer the end, and some insist on living in the middle like perfectly stable furniture. Programs attempt translations and produce prose that reads like a dream about cooking, where the kitchen keeps moving to another house. When the results become confident, the next folio undoes them, which is almost tender of the book if you think about it. The images of women in baths encourage gentle, hygienic hypotheses. Perhaps the manuscript is about health, about warming and cooling and washing and herbs you can hold in your hand. Medieval physicians believed the body was a conversation conducted in humors, and warm water could teach those humors to sit nicely. The star wheels could be calendars for selecting auspicious days to take a bath, which is a practice that never harmed anyone. And the jars marching across the page like small, obedient soldiers could be the pharmacy, each vessel a recipe that does not mind being looked at. This reading has the advantage of not requiring a conspiracy. It also has the advantage of being easy to fall asleep to, which is always a sign that you're near the truth. Now and then the book offers a practical joke. A fold-out opens like a shy accordion and reveals a map of influences that refuses to say which way north is. A plant pretends to be two plants standing on each other's shoulders under a coat. A pool of water connects to another pool by a tube that would definitely leak if you tried it at home. The marginal figures smile with the unblinking generosity of people who have agreed not to remember your name, because remembering names is work. Libraries improve their lights. Multispectral imaging arrives like a quiet winter sun, pulling hidden ink out of its chair and walking it around the room. Faint lines brighten. Erased strokes flash for a moment like fish under thin ice. The book accepts the attention with perfect equanimity. Nothing dramatic happens. No secret Latin diary bursts from the margins announcing that lunch was goat. The manuscript offers only a more refined version of the same resistance, which is almost tender too. When a mystery refuses to sharpen under better light, it is telling you that the mystery is not a shadow. It is something woven into the cloth. Scholars attempt paleography and point out how certain letter shapes know habits common to early 15th century scribes. Codicologists measure the quires and nudge the binding. A conservator sighs happily over the quires that were resewn with care by someone who respected paper more than applause. The page sizes are almost regular, the ruling almost even, the paint applied with the kind of brush that knows how to say, she. One could spend a very restful hour just counting the tiny paint flecks where a brush lifted and a dot remained, each a record of a human breath you never met. Occasionally, a strong claim pushes open the door and looks around. It's proto-romance, someone says, and everybody nods politely and asks for examples. It's an enciphered Turkish, says another, and a small crowd gathers over the transliteration and brings sandwiches. It's glossolalia, says a third, a record of speaking in tongues conducted with exceptional neatness. Each claim enjoys a brief season of plausible weather. Each melts back into the ground like last week's snow. The book remains relaxed. It has seen many winters. The book's journey produces a trail of owners. A Holy Roman Emperor's library was once mentioned, which is the sort of rumor manuscripts collect the way coats collect lint. A Prague connection appears in one letter. A Jesuit college in Italy appears in ledgers that smell faintly of candle smoke and decisions. The manuscript travels kindly but never quickly. When it finally reaches a modern university, the glass case is not a prison but a spa day. The vellum likes a stable climate and does not judge the air conditioning. Visitors lean in, fog the glass with curiosity, and drift away to the gift shop, where they consider buying a pencil that says something sensible. Sometimes a translator is tempted to announce a solution and ask everyone to clap. The manuscript, being a patient object, does not clap back. It merely allows the next folio to contradict whatever you just decided. It encourages the apprentice decipherer to take a walk, to visit a cafe, to imagine the scribes who wrote this in a room with a window and perhaps a dog asleep under the table. It is a manuscript that constantly reroutes pride into routine. You cannot conquer it. You can only inventory it, which is the kind of work that likes to be done with a cup of tea nearby. If you try to read it as a clock instead of a text, it relaxes further. Look at each folio as an hour, each motif as a hand, each line as the sweep between 12 and 1. Time passes calmly. Jars repeat. Stars reappear. A bath connects to a bath by a pipe you now recognize as exactly wrong, and therefore exactly characteristic. In this reading, meaning is not a sentence, meaning is a rhythm. And rhythms are friendly at bedtime because they reward listening more than solving. A small pleasure lies in the labels that do not label. In European herbals, a leaf is often named beside itself so firmly you can feel the plant stiffen. Here, instead, the script points and says something only the script understands. It is not secrecy. It is privacy. Like a dream that refuses to be narrated but still leaves you calm, the labels demonstrate usefulness without explaining it. They are the historic equivalent of a recipe card that says, "You know the rest." Theories about the author parade by an order of how much fun they are to imagine. A clever nun with access to pigments and a pleasant interest in warm water. A provincial physician who found peace in copying and no peace in patience. Two scribes in a small workshop, sharing a lamp and discussing the weather through the winter of 1420. A solitary cipher maker building an experiment too tidy to publish. Or just an ordinary scribe doing paid work for someone who said, "I would like a book that organizes the world in a way I will find soothing." On some level, of course, we're all that patron. One of the more charming facts about this book is how many people it is allowed to be wrong with dignity. You can spend a month on a hypothesis, apply statistics like warm blankets, and discover you have woven a very comfortable coat for a tree. The manuscript does not punish you for this. It simply remains itself and accepts your attention. That is a quality most people look for in friends and almost never find in puzzles. There is also the matter of what not to do. Do not force the book to speak Latin when it is not in the mood. Do not insist that every plant be a plant you have already met. Do not pretend a matching shape is proof. An old book says in clouds, shapes are generous with advice you did not ask for. Instead, you can try a respectful schedule, a folio before breakfast, another after lunch, a third in the hour when light has the personality of tea. Keep a notebook of ordinary things, dates, inks, who owned it when. If you feel an answer forming with dramatic certainty, take a walk around the block until it loosens and starts to hum instead of shout. A practical reading strategy is to treat each section as a room. The herbal leaves room for conjecture but enjoys being looked at. The star wheels enjoy being misunderstood with affection. The bathing diagrams would like you to take a break and drink water. The recipes, if they are recipes, want you to appreciate the patience of listing. Stand quietly in each room and notice what repeats. Repetition is the book's way of introducing you to its habits. Habits are meaning's jacket. You can hang your curiosity on them while you sit down. If you are still awake, count the letter forms that recur like a melody. Some clusters behave like prefixes, stepping forward first to greet you. Others trail behind like gentle punctuation known only to the script. When a line begins, certain shapes rush to the front the way small children do when a door opens. When a line ends, different shapes assemble like adults near a coat rack. These behaviors do not translate into English, but they do translate into calm. The page is a landscape with prevailing winds. To notice the winds is to stop demanding road signs. A secret that is not particularly secret is that genuine mysteries are less like boxes with locks and more like rooms with drafts. You turn around and a page has lifted a corner. You put the page down and a different corner lifts. Eventually, you stop weighing the corners with your fingers and simply enjoy the breeze. The Voynich Manuscript is excellent at this. It invites the reader to practice something medieval and modern at once, attention without acquisition. Sometimes a historian will place the manuscript beside other 15th century books to see what they do together. The neighbors are not jealous. and Herbal in Latin offers practical advice about boiling roots, and the Voynich responds with a drawing of a root that looks like a violin. A book of calendars explains when Saturn will take offense, and the Voynich replies with a wheel sprouting polite spokes. A treatise on baths claims that warm water reconciles the body to itself, and the Voynich provides an entire municipal plumbing plan for reconciliation. The conversation is not precise, but is good company for falling asleep to. It is tempting to end by proposing a solution, because endings enjoy answering questions the way cats enjoy boxes. But this is not a series about answers, it is a series about drifting. The best use of the Voynich Manuscript at night is to let it be what it is, a book that functions like a fan, moving air in a small, steady circle until the mind settles. Picture an old scriptorium at dusk. A scribe lifts his quill, breathes, and writes a line that will not be read the way he read it, yet will be read. Another scribe adds a figure in a bath and smiles at the idea of heated water in February. Someone closes the cover and ties the clasp without impatience. The page rustles. The candle leans. Outside, a dog sighs in the precise way that dogs have sighed forever. Let the book remain unread and still manage to be understood. Keep the facts that help it breathe. A probable date, a chain of owners, a preference for being looked at rather than solved. Keep the rest gentle. If your eyes grow heavy around the next paragraph, consider that the manuscript has done its kindest work. It has turned a problem into a lullaby. It has taught you a small medieval trick. Sometimes the correct translation of a text is a night of sleep you needed, delivered in time in a language your body knows. The candle is a gold cave. The page is a quiet room. The letters keep walking rightward, endlessly calm. You can let them go on without you for a while. You might not expect a thin, imaginary line to quietly steal a day, but that is what the international dateline does, moving like a cat that knows which table to avoid. The world prefers to think of time as a friendly staircase, each step the same, yet somewhere out on a large blue rug of ocean, there's a seam. Sailors once met it with pencil stubs and tea tins, and even now planes pass over it with in-flight maps that blink tomorrow in tiny fonts, as if that were a perfectly ordinary word to place near a cloud. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe or not. I won't know, and the wine won't either. It has other chores, keeping Tuesday from shaking hands with Thursday, keeping Wednesday from getting ideas. We will take it slowly. No heroics, no drama. Just the quiet maintenance of a calendar that wants to be simple and never quite is. First, we linger with the problem the line was meant to solve, but never exactly finished. People long ago learned to count the sun, the moon, and the crops, but ships complicated things by insisting on moving. A medieval merchant could leave a port on what he swore was Monday follow winds that were in a mood to be helpful and return to find a town clerk insisting it was also Monday, but a different one. And could he please sign the ledger for 2 Mondays, since they wouldn't reconcile otherwise? The earth rotates politely, but humans carry notebooks, and the notebooks prefer pages to be in order. Eastbound, the days pile up like plates at a buffet. Westbound, they slip away, which is not the same as being lost. The problem is less cosmic than clerical. Noon insists on arriving once per day per longitude, which is fine until somebody demands that a week should have 7 days in a tidy sequence. There is surprisingly little passion in it, only the gentle stubbornness of habits. Markets open, bells ring. The baker insists that Thursday is the day for rolls with seeds. Even a faintly ridiculous paradox will be tolerated if it doesn't disturb breakfast. The line that we draw in our atlases is not truly a line. It is a suggestion with elbows. 19th century map makers gave it a nice vertical look at 180 degrees, straight through empty ocean where no one could object, and then islands objected. Kiribati's parliament preferred that its scattered atolls share the same calendar as one another and the same weekend. So the suggestion jogged politely east, then farther east, then became what cartographers call a wrinkle, an endearing term for an arrangement negotiated over tea. Western Samoa once lived on the American side of the wrinkle, and then, with a slow exhale and a press release, moved to the Asian side to trade more easily with tomorrow. People woke up on a Friday and went to bed on a Sunday without anyone being punished for skipping Saturday's chores. If you think this must have caused an argument about wages or sermons, you are right, but the arguments were sleepy and respectful. The line would shrug if it had shoulders. Older calendars made things even more velvety. In 1582, when the Gregorian reform asked several Catholic countries to step lightly over 10 dates, the Philippines, being a Spanish colony, skipped them too. They did not walk over water. They simply didn't write the dates down, which is the administrative version of walking over water. For a while, pilots of later centuries would smile at these absences in archives the way one smiles at a hotel. Corridor with a missing 13th floor. Russia delayed its change until after its revolutions, which is more scheduling than symbolism. It meant that when people corresponded across borders in the 19th century, letters were 2 dates, like a traveler wearing 2 scarves, one for comfort, one for conversation. You can almost hear a quiet after-dinner voice, Thursday, or Friday by your reckoning. The international dateline eventually consolidated these habits into a lazy spine. Across the Pacific, a place for the world to agree to disagree in orderly fashion. Sailors kept the accounts. Their logs show the consequences with the charm of board handwriting. Crossed meridian, dropped a day, or the opposite, gained a day at sea. These phrases are tidier than the mood on deck, where the cook must decide whether the Sunday stew happens twice or not at all. One captain, tidy to the point of delight, arranged for a double Sunday to keep the devotional schedule symmetrical. Another simply penciled a star and wrote, "No day," which proves the practicality of graphite. If you fear that time is fragile, the logs reassure. It folds quietly, with a crease you can press flat. Meanwhile, on shore, missionaries and merchants wrote home with the same patient elasticity. They did not tremble at the notion of a duplicated Tuesday. They wondered whether the ship carrying peppercorns would arrive before rain. The pepper, like the dateline, cared very little about metaphysics. It only asked to be dry. Across the centuries, theorists of time behave like librarians, tidying a shelf they cannot finish. Before there was this line, there were lines for convenience. Astronomers needed 1 midnight to anchor a day, sailors a noon to fix a sight, priests a morning to start prayers. Once standard time arrived in the 19th century railway timetables, dampening the vanity of local noon people were ready to accept a single wrinkle for dates. They printed time zone maps with a dozen well-behaved bands and one eccentric scene, like a dignified suit with a cheerful lining. It is fashionable to imagine that triangles of mathematics forced the world into order, but the order was made out of meetings. The International Meridian Conference in 1884, a fine name for a polite argument, chose Greenwich as 0, and let the opposite side of the world fall wherever it caused the least trouble. The least trouble is a very good principle. It wins more votes than beauty and fewer complaints than truth. If you glance at a modern globe in passing, the line looks like a commitment. When you trace it gently with a finger while everyone else is asleep, it becomes what it always was, a reminder that maps are patient stories told by people who dislike rubbing out. The line gives airlines an opportunity to write cheerful anecdotes in in-flight magazines about arriving earlier than you leave, which is not a miracle, but an enthusiastic way to discuss longitude. The flight attendant's voice, practiced and kind, will say, "Welcome to yesterday," which is a sentence fit for a dream. In the logbook, it still becomes a star or a dash or a phrase in tiny capitals. Ship or plane, you do not jump. You annotate. On cruises designed for the experience, the entertainment officer organizes a small ceremony with a cardboard crown for King Neptune, who is gracious about both equators and imaginary walls in the calendar. The preferred drink is something with a slice of fruit and a lot of ice, the taste of boredom with a sugar rim. Many theories insist that the line means more than it does. Metaphysical essays, philosophical sighs, thou shalt not jokes about aging backward. They are friendly theories and do little harm. If the line could talk, it would choose soft verbs. It reconciles. It aligns. It excuses the clerk who likes consistent spreadsheets. It does not erase birthdays. It helps the ship's purser decide whether the cake should be wheeled out at 8 or 9. It offers an extra New Year's sus. Even if you are willing to fly swiftly enough and pay for 2 hotel rooms that are technically in different years. Somewhere a mathematician has written an elegant proof about cyclic groups and modular arithmetic, and it would bless your sleep to know that behind every untroubled celebration of midnight, there hums a tidy equation. The equation does not need applause, it needs a drawer. There are also small human traditions, brittle and charming. Meteorologists speak of Zulu time and then almost never use it in polite company. Mariners tell stories about a storm that refused to cross the line until Wednesday because the ship, as calendar said, Tuesday had already been spent. The tale is politely untrue, which is the best kind of maritime anecdote. On islands that shifted their allegiance across the date line for trade, there is always one person in the newspaper archives who wrote a letter to the editor asking whether this meant that their roses would bloom a day sooner. The editor replied courteously that roses track weather, not minutes, but the question is the kind of thing roses would enjoy hearing. Bureaucrats in distant capitals stamped new forms. The forms were pleased to be involved. They like boxes and signatures and a line in the corner that says, date, with plenty of space for whatever the government has just decided the date will be. When you follow the line northward in winter on a map, it runs shyly along the rim of the Aleutians, respecting the fishing schedules of towns whose names are comfortable with consonants. Southward, it wanders between Samoa and American Samoa, as if it didn't too want to start a conversation between cousins. Near Antarctica, it disperses because there is more ice than paperwork, and the penguins refuse to comment. At this scale, geography takes the lead, and time hikes after it with a warm thermos. The line avoids land the way a well-brought-up guest avoids discussing money at dinner. Its deflections are small acts of courtesy from conferences you would have yawned through, and yet will be grateful for at the cash register or the customs desk. An older seaman once described it to a younger one as an understanding, which is a fine nautical term and a portable philosophy. In the age of cables, one might expect the line to have retired. Communications leap across it with a faint click that isn't even a click, just a drama added by marketing teams. Email stamps respectfully obey local settings, which is to say they obey whoever's laptop is doing the stamping. Streaming services release shows at midnight Pacific, and for everyone else, it is tasteful exercise in subtraction. News tickers regard the line as a polite rumor. They have their own urgency, which is mostly pretend. If a satellite can watch a storm grow hour by hour, then midnight is simply the moment when your weather app changes its mind about the background color. The line keeps its job anyway. Someone must hold the account books together and verify that Tuesday had exactly one sunrise for each town that expected it. That is the work. It does not make history. It files it. You can test the line with a small personal experiment. Buy a paper diary, the kind with squares that generously wish you a busy life, and a cheap wall map. Choose 2 neighboring islands, say, one that listens to New Zealand and one that converses with Hawaii. When the diary says Monday in one square and Tuesday in the next, draw a little boat that sails from the Monday to the Tuesday and write, under it, banana bread, to mark that you ate the same slice twice. If you prefer a plane, tape a boarding pass stub to the page and underline the date stamped at the kiosk and the date your phone insisted on when it connected to the local tower. Do this for no reason other than to notice. The line loves being noticed quietly. It has no desire to be explained, only to be regarded with the sort of affection we reserve for a shopkeeper who always remembers which envelope size we prefer. A frequent soft joke says the line is where time zones go to change into pajamas. This is less silly than it sounds. Midnight is a comfortable garment for the world. The line is the drawer it comes from. Ships still ring bells. Planes still dim cabin lights at a negotiated hour. Children are still told that bedtime is non-negotiable except on holidays, which are very clever inventions for bending rules without creasing them. The dateline is the holiday of geography, a place where rules stretch in the company of maps and nobody yells. There is a noticeable absence of wars about it. There are hardly even stern memos. The fiercest protests concerned whether businesses would open on the same day as their trading partners, which is a way of saying that money likes to nap. Sometimes the best proof that an idea works is that the angriest argument it provokes concerns shipping insurance. In the language of cartographers, features have attributes. A river has a source and a mouth. A mountain has elevation and apparent peak. A dateline has a legal status, which is a phrase that sounds as if it requires a courtroom but mostly needs a pen. Nations decide what their calendars will say, and the line decent and unassuming meets the decisions with small kinks so that neighbors can keep visiting at convenient hours. It is not perfectly fair. No line is, but it is not trying to be grand. It is trying to be useful. At sea, where utility is a form of tenderness, the line is beloved for its predictability. The cabin clock flips at an agreed bell. The watch schedule slides to a new grid. The coffee tastes the same, which is a mercy. These are the virtues that put people to sleep in the nicest way: sameness, clarity, and the promise that someone else thought about it earlier. Perhaps, if you like a very mild absurdity, consider the fact that every day, somewhere, the dateline welcomes the first new day and waves goodbye to the last old day, all while being itself fully present in neither. It is like a friend who takes photographs at a party and later is not in any of them. Statisticians would point out that this is a framing problem. Poets would agree and take the afternoon off. The line does not suffer from this paradox any more than a ruler suffers from the inches it helps define. It simply watches dates arrive, all of them with good posture and sensible shoes, and then depart, having shed their hats and secrets. The line stores none of it. It is a specialist in letting go. When people use the phrase lost day, they mean a day we did not write down, which is different from the kind of day that gets away because we were distracted by a sparrow outside the window or a recipe for lentil soup. The line does not take those days. Those belong to us and to housework. The dateline is only a librarian of headings. It is satisfied when shipmasters fill in the correct square, when payroll runs without somebody in the back room squinting at a ledger and asking whether the factory produced socks on a day that never existed. Tiny successes collect around it like calm air. It is the least ambitious line to have mattered, and it matters to everyone. If you are still listening, you may like a very simple mnemonic for the line, a lullaby for geography. Going west, add a day. Going east, subtract one. Left adds, right subtracts, if you prefer a map that points up. It is not elegant, but the line is not an elegant thing. It is the ecological niche for small mathematical truths in a world of grocery lists. It asks only that you keep track. It forgives even that upon request. An airline will correct your itinerary. A clerk will stamp the cube on the form that says date of entry and smile as if calendars were a pleasant hobby. If you treasure drama, the line is not for you. If you relish details that lay themselves down like a blanket, this is your corner of the atlas. There is finally a domestic way to honor the line. Choose one evening per year, any will do, and declare it the day we forgot Saturday. Eat breakfast for dinner. Write tomorrow's date on a sticky note and put it on the refrigerator, even though the refrigerator does not ask for this information. If anyone in the house protests, point at a map and nod solemnly. Then switch off some lights, the way ships dim for night watches, and read a few lines from a timetable just to hear the soft rhythm of departures and arrivals. When you close the book, the pages will make a sound rather like a wave. Somewhere near a wrinkle of longitude, the world will be adjusting its paperwork by one square, and nobody will be hurrying. The line will be pleased you thought of it, and you will have given Tuesday a slightly kinder landing. We have come this far without crossing anything other than the room. The line remains at sea, folding and unfolding like a ribbon. For all its whispering significance, it never insists. It only invites cooperation. Tomorrow will reach you whether you chase it or let it come, and in either case, the coffee will be at the same temperature as usual. The map may show a seam, but sleep is the true dateline, the one you cross with a soft breath and a blanket. East or west does not matter much then. A day is gained or spent. A note in a log concludes with a period. The ship's bell sounds once, then twice, then not at all. Somewhere a clerk draws a little star and writes "no day," and that is enough. You might not think a book could be both famous and silent, but this one is. It sits like a calm riddle. Vellum the color of candle wax, a hand that no one living can read. The first sound is paper that is not paper, the soft rasp of calfskin turning under a fingertip. If you picture a small chest opened in a quiet college, you are already close. A bookseller finds a compact codex, tired but composed, and in it, careful ink lines that never hurry. Greenish plants, small star wheels, tubs of water with figures who look unbothered by the centuries. The book crosses a threshold into the 20th century, carried by a man with an excellent mustache and a talent for acquiring puzzles. The book brings only its breath and its patience. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel very free to subscribe or not, or half decide and forget. This book rewards indecision with the same serene face. It helps to notice the way the page crackles when it moves. That is the texture of time lit by a desk lamp. The vellum says, quietly, that it belongs to the early 15th century, to a Europe that wrote in hands like loops of ivy. The ink glides left to right, as if a river knows its bed. A neat quill scratches, pauses, scratches again, and the letters sit down like polite guests. They seem confident. They pretend to be words and behave like them, but the voice behind them never steps out to say hello. We have a grammar without a mouth. It is astonishing how modest that can feel. The book did not always live in catalogs. Whisperers say an emperor paid for odd books and might have owned this one for an afternoon of curiosity. Another rumor seats it in Jesuit hands, stored with care because care is what you do when you cannot do anything else. Margins pick up footprints from different centuries, a cautious note here, a different hymn there, a set of numerals that are almost, but not quite, helpful. Imagine each owner performing the same orderly ritual catalog. Compare, guess, give up, shelve it. Then repeat in a tidy loop, the way a night clock ticks its small circle of time, whether anyone listens or not. The book never argues. It turns another leaf. The imagery is probably the most cheerful thing about it. Botanicals sprawl across pages with the confidence of plants that have never had to pass a test. They are almost known. A leaf looks like one you have seen on a hillside in June, but then the root breaks into delicate bottles, as if the plant had attended a glassblower's fair. Later sections drift toward the sky. Little zodiac emblems rotate on star wheels, and small bathers consider their tub etiquette under arches dotted with stars. The line between a bathhouse and a cosmos becomes friendly and porous. The labels march along like good soldiers whose captain never shows up. Jars assemble themselves at the end of a section, narrow-necked and prim, as if ready to be counted by pharmacists with no customers. If you listen for the book's language, you meet about 24 shapes that recur with steady, unembarrassed rhythm. Loops, benches, gallows-like stems, neat C's, and tall L's that could be cousins to letters, if they would only admit it. They form words in families. Prefixes enjoy being prefixes. Endings enjoy ending. Punctuation does not apply for work. The line is one slow river with no stones to interrupt it. When statisticians peek in, they nod with the grave satisfaction of people who recognize a pattern. Word frequencies curve like natural language. Zip would feel at home. Entropy levels behave themselves. But meaning remains behind a door that never opens. It is like hearing a conversation through a wall. The voices alternate, you sense a joke, you can count the laughs, and still you cannot report a single sentence. Scholars have had their favorite theories, as scholars must, since favorite theories were invented. One camp sees a cipher. It behaves like speech, they say, and therefore speech is hiding somewhere beneath. Another camp lays out the tools of the constructed language maker, a monk's laboratory of vowels and rules. A third group, more austere, suggests a hoax. Yet the book is so consistent, so tirelessly regular, that the hoax would have required a personality with the endurance of a metronome and the sense of humor of a wall. There are proposals with delightful names, steganography, elaborate word lists, code books arranged like stairs that never quite reach the attic. Radiocarbon speaks softly from the vellum and places the animal, and therefore the pages in the early 1400s. The ink, like a guest who respects the house, sits comfortably on that date and does not complain. Machines have been invited to help. Multispectral lights tease the faded strokes the way dawn teases windows. Computers sort the lines into dialects, which we call A and B, a very polite way of admitting we do not know what else to call them. The machines are good sports. They produce translations that unfold into something close to meaning, and then carefully unravel at the next folio, like scarves that turn back into yarn. Some models whisper that the script is natural. Others shrug. The book does not object. It has never raised its voice. There is a tender art to reading a page that does not confess. It begins by not grabbing. You can map the book section by section: herbal, astro, balneological, pharmaceutical. Recipes quiet taxonomies that do not insist but drift into order like silt in a clear jar. You can track parallels. A star that reappears, a jar that returns with a slightly different hat, a leaf that remembers to curl right rather than left. You begin to treat each folio as a clock. The hands move in motifs, not in minutes. Your attention becomes a lens, and you are careful not to polish it too hard. Sometimes I think the folios want you to read for rhythm. A loop followed by a bench on a tall stem, repeated, softened, then broken politely. A page breathes. The long line glides, and your mind glides with it. If you have ever listened to rain against a slate roof and counted, without meaning to, the distance between drops, you know the feeling. There are micro punchlines if you let them happen. A plant's roots refuse dirt and insist on glass. A zodiac sign sits in a bowl as if it were waiting for soup. A bathhouse escorts a constellation to the door without a fuss. These are jokes that do not require laughter, only an amused exhale. When the theories circle back cipher again, hoax again, grammar again, you notice how tidy their orbits are. Each theory has its own moon. Each waxes, each wanes. And still the book sits, apparently satisfied with each attempt. Steady scholars return with neat tables of word shapes and neighbor families. They bring entropy measures like housewarming gifts. They say, with a kind of proud resignation that the book's statistical profile matches that of human languages. Meaning, however, does not arrive with the numbers. As in many relationships, compatibility does not guarantee conversation. You can pass an enjoyable hour with the marginalia alone. There are hands that are not the main hand. There are notes that look like directions written on the back of a receipt. A few numbers hint at value or quantity, but they dangle unmoored. One tiny drawing, almost certainly a star, returns in 3 places like a friend who lives close by and borrows teacups. Even the stitching along the gutter speaks if you lean very close, a late rebinding here, a careful repair there. The physical book has biographies the language refuses to share. A favorite exercise is to imagine the scribe. They do not have to be a genius. They have to be patient. They have to enjoy consistency the way some people enjoy oatmeal. Perhaps they worked where the light was good. Perhaps the desk was near a soft window. Perhaps they sat with a little bowl of sand to dry the ink and an elbow that knew exactly how far to drift before returning to the line. They could have been copying something they understood. They could have been inventing a language by rule and practicing it to fluency on the page. Whatever else is true, they did not fidget. The script is too calm for fidgeting. Others have hoped the pictures would betray the text and offer clues. The pictures are loyal. The botanicals, if matched to any herbarium, match late at night after too much tea. The roots in bottles remain an especially polite refusal. The star wheels point to real constellations only in the way that clouds point to real animals. The bathers seem comfortable in plumbing that never quite existed. The jars assemble like a pharmacy roll call and then neglect to name themselves in any pharmacy we can visit. Still, the comfort is real. The pages have the tidy abundance of a well-run pantry. If you are awake enough to wonder what the book wants, it wants you to slow down. There is no triumph here, only method. It rewards the person who can sit with not knowing, as if not knowing were a cat content to nap on the windowsill. The book is best readers keep notes as carefully as monks, but allow every certainty to travel with a return ticket. They keep facts in jars, folio numbers, ink chemistry, vellum date, ownership marks, binding changes. They do not insist that jars are the pantry. They dust them, label them, and return them to the shelf. Now and then a new device arrives, and someone shines a kinder light into the lines. It always helps a little. A curve tightens. A letter called gallows looks slightly less like a gallows and slightly more like a chair. A faint stroke appears and excuses a past misreading. These are small graces. They feel like untying a knot in a shoelace you are not sure would cooperate. The larger knot waits nearby and does not take it personally. The culture around the book has its own history, which is wonderfully domestic. There are conferences where scholars drink coffee and say, well, in 5 languages. There are message boards where someone posts a new alphabet mapping at 3 in the morning and others greet it with either a welcome or a nap. There are patient librarians who log requests for the same folio again and again without rolling their eyes. There are reproductions that smell like fresh printing and still somehow carry the hush of the original's vellum. If you have ever joined a hobby where the main activity is labeling drawers, you will feel right at home. Sometimes when the room is quiet and the desk lamp is friendly, you can practice reading a page as though it were music. You follow the measures. You hear the cadence of a line break that does not break. You let the repeated syllable do what repeated syllables do in lullabies. They carry you forward without telling you where you are going. A human brain likes that more than it admits. It is relaxing to be in motion without destination. And if you need a souvenir, here are a few that do not weigh much. The vellum is early 1400s by radiocarbon. The ink fits the costume. The script runs left to right and behaves like a natural language in how its words distribute. Its alphabet is a family of about 24 shapes that are far too comfortable with each other to be random. The book sections are stable and politely themed. Herbs, stars, baths, jars, recipes, the tidy life of a practical imagination. Machines have tried to love it, humans have tried as well. Understanding has not replied, but pleasant company has been achieved. A workable approach, for those who like approaches, is to let attention be your craft. Keep one firm fact in each mental jar. Do not overfill. Learn to enjoy the small repeaters. A loop beside a bench, a tall letter bending its head, a star drawn with a certain stubbornness, a jar that favors a narrow neck. Count without counting. Compare without deciding. At the end of an hour, remove one certainty and congratulate yourself on the space created. It is surprisingly restful. The last comfort is this: a thing can be understood in two ways, by solution or by acquaintance. Most of your room is the second kind. The chair you sit on is understood not because you know the mathematics of its joints, but because you have sat in it so long it has taken the shape of you. The book no one can read offers that kind of understanding. You can sit with it until it becomes furniture for the mind. Not a puzzle, not a prize, just a good solid chair that creaks in an agreeable way when you lean. The candle gutters, the vellum cools, the letters keep their posture. The star wheels do not mind the dark. Someone in the past turned the same page and heard the same soft rasp and felt, perhaps, the same mixture of hope and drowsiness. That is enough for tonight. Let the room dim. Let the script go on speaking in the way waves speak to shore, plenty of motion, very little message, and not a hint of hurry. When you wake, it will still be there, patient as ever. A small language pretending nothing, a quiet friend dressed like a riddle. You might not expect a book full of plants that don't exist, stars that bathe, and writing no one can rate to sound relaxing, but it is. The cover opens like a sigh. The pages breathe in a papery way, crisp and a little stubborn, as if they remember colder rooms and slower hands. Vellum has the voice of very patient leather. Tonight we follow a single small codex that pretends to be ordinary, while doing nothing of the sort. It is not a long book. It is not a heavy book. It is simply the kind of book that refuses to give you what you ask for, and by doing so, gives you a better night's sleep. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe to more of these drowsy digressions, or don't. I'll never know. Either way, let your shoulders drop as though someone loosened a clasp. The candle is steady. The words are slower than usual on purpose. A chest is opened in a quiet building that was once a villa, once a college, once a place where students practiced careful handwriting and the art of putting papers into boxes. In the chest sits a book bound in calfskin that has been patient for centuries. It smells faintly of dust that learned manners in a library. The man who lifts it out will later give it his name, because that is a thing people do with mysteries. They label them, the way you might put a sticker on a jar whose contents have already escaped. He is Wilfred, a bookseller who likes long walks through collections and the way old bindings thicken at the hinges. He turns a page. It is smooth and slightly shiny, the way vellum is when the calf it once belonged to has been forgotten respectfully. The ink on it has browned politely. You could pass a fingertip over a line and feel nothing, but you would think you did. On one folio, there are plants with leaves that look like they might have been told about leaves without ever meeting one. The roots go into jars as if the ground were a tidy kitchen and botany preferred canning. On another, the zodiac winks in tiny pools where round-faced people wade without discussing the temperature. In the margins, stars are drawn like small, careful asterisks, the kind that avoid arguments. The script moves left to right in confident rows, not so much writing as the memory of writing, a loop and bench parade that behaves like a language in public and never speaks at home. Someone once counted the characters and decided there were about 24 basic shapes with several variations, which is exactly the kind of fact that makes you feel comforted without becoming enlightened. Numbers tuck you in even when meaning goes for a walk. The book has traveled through quiet rooms where it was admired, inspected, and then put away again. In one place, it was recorded as an interesting item. In another, it was a puzzle on a shelf. An emperor is said to have paid good money for curious books. Later owners may have paid in patience. A Jesuit college stored it in a chest, which is what sensible institutions do when they are not sure whether a thing is precious or preposterous. Each stop gave the book a new climate of whispers. Perhaps it is a cipher, someone murmured while the ink lay still. Perhaps it is a hoax, someone shrugged while the parchment kept its polite temperature. Perhaps it is nothing at all, said a weary cataloger who had an appointment 30 other volumes that could at least be alphabetized. The codex did not rush to correct anyone. When people spoke, it turned another measured page. If you listen closely, you can hear the book reassuring the shelves beside it. The binding creaks a little like a staircase that has forgiven everyone who ever went up it. The gilt on the edges is not really gilt. There is none, but your eyes supply it anyway, because we are generous with the past when it refuses to compete with the present. The manuscript's line breaks have a rhythm like a small river that has learned its banks by heart. There are no punctuation marks to put their hands up and tell you where to breathe. You breathe when you like. You read what is not there and call it style. You turn a page and think, yes, that is a recipe, and then decide it might be an astronomical diagram that grew tired and put on a kitchen hat. The ambiguity is not a bug, it is the lullaby. Scholars counted the words, or the not words, and noticed that they behave statistically like speech. Common tokens repeat often. Rare ones stroll in like distant cousins who still send postcards. The manuscript keeps to a modest vocabulary and distributes it with mechanical courtesy. This pleases some people because it suggests an underlying grammar, the way a good pastry suggests a hidden recipe. Others point to the illustrations, herbal, balneological, astronomical, pharmaceutical if you squint and decide the text could merely be decorative, like frosting with an unusually stable personality. There are jars and bathing pools and green shoots and star wheels. There are long passages of neat lines that look less like sentences and more like a city's worth of window blinds. You might try to pronounce the glyphs under your breath and find that your mouth refuses to cooperate, as though the letters were from a country that never issued passports. Machines have tried. In the last century and this one, scanners slid along the pages like very shy snakes, capturing every stain and every slightly bent line. Algorithms tested whether the words clustered in ways that real languages do, and many times the answer came back like an old friend. Yes, kind of. Multispectral lights coaxed out traces too faint for ease and too stubborn for applause. Hidden drawings were teased from the vellum's underlayer, which is a charming phrase, like discovering a draft beneath a draft, a thought that forgot to lock the door. Computers took the pages apart and rebuilt them in larger units to see if the text changed behavior when it had no choice, as if it might confess by exhaustion. Even then, it stayed exactly as talkative as a very polite cat. It told the truth in a language that might exist. It listened in one that might not. Radiocarbon had a turn. It is not a chatty method, but it is dependable with dates, and it said the pages were from the early 15th century, which is a period that looks good on everyone. The ink is of a kind that also suits the time. The pictures have a style that would not embarrass the era either. That is as close to biography as the book is willing to grant. Its birthplace is unknown, its authorship speculative, its purpose-free range. It sits in a modern library now, grinning in its way, which is to say not at all. People visit scans of it online and lean toward their screens, as though the letters will become shy if looked at head-on. Someone always notices that a particular plant resembles an herb that grows in a garden they once watered briefly. Someone else points out that the zodiac's months do not quite match the ones hanging in their kitchen. Everyone is correct at a comfortable distance. It is easy to fall into theories. We all own a drawer full of them. One says, an unknown European language written in a phonetic script, compressed for space like rolled clothes in a travel trunk. Another says, a constructed language, the private grammar of a single mind who liked secrets better than conversations. A bolder idea climbs onto the desk and proclaims, it is glossolalia made tidy, the murmurs of trance translated into lines for the sake of even margins. A more pragmatic suggestion shows up with a ledger and notes. A hoax, a money-making curiosity assembled from borrowed drawings and confident nonsense. The manuscript lets them speak. It obligingly demonstrates consistency to comfort the linguists and a lack of external references to amuse the skeptics. When asked for an opinion, it turns to a page of bathing figures who look pleased to be undeciphered while naked. One of the stranger comforts is that the book could be correct in several incompatible ways. If it is a cipher, it is a cipher that forgot the key somewhere very safe. If it is a language, it is one that never worried about listeners. If it is an art project, it is the sort that takes 500 years to finish not finishing. This is the part where a microfax slides in wearing slippers. There are gallows characters, tall shapes that tower over the line like dignified lampposts. They often appear at the beginning of words, which is a detail so serene it could rock you to sleep. Another small hook, words at the end of lines tend to be shorter, as if the scribe grew thrifty near the right margin, the way some people become efficient near bedtime. Observations like these fill a notebook efficiently while accomplishing absolutely nothing, which is ideal. We might pause and take a slow breath in and out, the way parchment expands and contracts with the room. Imagine the scribe dipping a quill again and again into iron gall. Each letter a practice loop, each meaningless word treated like a meaningful one because the hand doing the writing belongs to a professional. The letters are patient because the arm is. The tiny baths are crowded because the illustrator liked the way round pools stack neatly, the way soap bubbles do. The plants insist on their impossible veins because the mind drawing them loved the way a stem can turn left twice without getting dizzy. Mystery is often just diligence wearing a cape. When modern readers play at decoding, they sometimes try simple swaps. This shape for an A, that shape for an E, and then step upward into more ambitious games. Soon the room is filled with frequency tables, transposition schemes, proposed alphabets that make handsome PDFs, and confidence that dims politely around week 3. Every so often, someone announces good news. The text finally yields meaning that sounds like meaning. Sentences arrive about herbs for the stomach and baths for the moon. They are the sort of sentences that would not offend a medieval apothecary or a modern mattress advertisement. Then the gloss unravels at the next page, and the manuscript returns to its favorite sport, being itself. Nothing quite fails like a near solution, and nothing soothes quite like the idea that the failure belongs equally to everyone. Machines have their own near solutions. They cluster the words into families, discover the script has syllable-like behavior, produce streams of output that resemble languages you have never heard of, but could almost imagine hearing if you fell asleep in a library where the dictionary snored. They measure entropy and nod appreciatively. Low entropy makes sense, they say, because natural languages reuse shapes like thrifty tailors reuse favorite cuts. High entropy would betray randomness. This is not randomness. The book behaves responsibly, like a guest who wipes their shoes even when the host insists it isn't necessary. After a while, the programs too go quiet, like a printer that has decided to be humble for the evening. The pages rest back in their case, with the balance of a cat returning to a favorite cushion. If one must draw any lesson from a document that refuses lessons, it is the gentle art of touching without grabbing. You can look closely at the script's rhythm, count the benches and loops, notice how certain clusters recur in herbal sections. but not astronomical ones, and feel you have understood something without needing to name it. You can track a star-shaped stamp from folio to folio like a cadence in a song. You can watch the jars repeat with small variations, like people telling the same story with fresh hand gestures. You can note how the pigments stay within the lines most of the time, as though the colorist was a careful collaborator who respected whoever drew first. The book rewards attention with more places to put your attention. It is like walking in a room where every shelf is neat, even if no shelf explains why shelves exist. There is a small comfort in the fact that radiocarbon dated the parchment to the early 1400s, because that makes the object old enough to be excused from modern expectations. We do not ask it to trend. We do not ask it to explain itself in a thread. We allow it the speed of vellum, the way you allow a grandfather clock to take its time. The manuscript is older than printing in most places, and younger than cathedrals in many, which positions it perfectly to be ignored by everyone except the kind of people who fall asleep happily between catalog entries. It knows the inside of chests and the look of ceilings viewed from below. It has felt the small weather of libraries, the drafts that happen when doors decide to gossip, the plush hush of dust that has learned not to land anywhere important. When you think too hard about the meaning, you miss the smaller pleasures. There is the cheerful stubbornness of the person who drew the same star wheel diagram several times with delicate differences. The way bakers turn out identical loaves that manifest their independence as they cool. There's the odd choice to place bathing pools on pages that otherwise contain recipes, as if the scribe believed that instructions for decoctions and instructions for soaking were typologically similar. There is the slightly comic insistence of a plant that grows two kinds of leaves in defiance of the local botany. There is the way certain words stretch like they are making room for themselves after a long carriage ride. Could it be a private joke? Possibly. Could it be a sacred system? Also possibly. Could it be someone passing time with ink, the medieval equivalent of a very elaborate fidget toy? Comfortingly, yes. When sleep tugs at your sleeve, the manuscript makes excellent company because it does not care whether you stay. It will be here when you return, having not progressed an inch toward confessing anything. You can keep a small list of anchors, about 24 letter shapes with gallows characters that stand taller. Lines written left to right, no obvious punctuation. Words that split into families like clusters at a reunion. Illustrations with plants, stars, baths, and jars. Pigments that mind their edges. Vellum dated to a century fond of pointed shoes. With these in mind, meaning becomes less urgent. You no longer chase the book. You stroll alongside it while it points amiably at things you already noticed. For an evening oath, you might promise the codex a few simple courtesies. Keep the date straight, early 15th century for skin, slightly later for the covers. Keep the owners tidy, a bookseller in the 20th century, institutions before him, rumors prior to those. Keep your guesses labeled as guesses and your certainties small enough to fit on a library's slip. Replace haste with inventory. Replace a need to solve with a willingness to look again. When frustration arrives, use it as a bookmark and close the cover softly, the way a lake closes over a skipped stone. Plans to decode can sleep in the drawer with your clean socks. The book will not run away. It has nowhere else to be. Before we let the candle gutter down to a modest button of light, imagine the manuscript as a room where the door is always ajar. You can push it wider and find yourself inside a quiet workshop. On the table are inks that no longer stain the fingers, brushes that shed nothing, a quill sharpened to an intent point, and the calm echo of people who have always preferred sitting to standing. On the walls are diagrams that might be constellations or recipes or both, connected by lines as neat as a railway map for a city that has agreed not to build any stations. Beneath the window, a plant that cannot exist grows contentedly in a pot that absolutely does. The room smells like the alphabet doing stretches. The silence is not empty, it is shelved. You might think of the manuscript one last time as a cooperative illusion. Consider that its writing looks like language, because we are good at seeing language everywhere. The way we see faces in toast and animals in clouds that are just practicing being water. Consider that its pictures look like information because we instinctively tidy images into categories. Consider that both these habits make us happy and sleepy at the same time. The page gives back whatever you place upon it, plus a margin of politeness. If you put a puzzle there, it nods and becomes puzzling. If you put rest there, it nods and becomes restful. It is an excellent partner in this regard. Now the candle makes a small blue noise and steadies. The room fades into the same charcoal the margins use. If you are still awake, you can remember that a book which no one can read is not a failure. It is a rare permission slip to stop insisting that meeting arrive on schedule. You can let the shapes be shapes and the baths be circles and the plants be extravagant rumors. You can allow the pages to turn at the pace of breathing, which is a pace they learned a very long time ago and have never needed to improve. Tomorrow the experts may try again, and the machines may hum again, and the manuscript will raise its calm little letters and continue doing what it always does, being a room you can sit in without turning on the light. You might not expect a small calfskin book to make so much noise by saying nothing at all, but that is the gentle comedy of the Voynich Manuscript, an object that hums very softly in a room and then refuses, absolutely, to explain itself. Imagine a lid lifting at a quiet college in Italy, the kind of place where the air tastes faintly of chalk and old orange peel. Inside is a codex with heavy vellum and a binding that has learned patience. Its pages are crowded with neat little drawings, plants no botanist can recognize without coughing first. Women bathing in green barrels with the composure of people waiting for a bus that never comes. Star wheels that look like horoscopes built by a watchmaker who only met geometry once at a party. A Polish bookseller named Wilfred Voynich buys it in the early 20th century, proud and slightly baffled, and the book is delighted to continue being exactly as helpful as a locked window. Vellum crackles like dry leaves. The ink sits on the surface the way frost sits on a winter railing. Scholars lean close, everyone careful not to breathe too directly. The first impression is ordinary. A medieval miscellany, perhaps a physician's notebook, perhaps a junk drawer. But the second impression stays longer. It says, with the calm of a librarian who has seen everything twice, that the handwriting looks like language and also does not, and that the pictures promise clarity and then practice evasion as a craft.rooms the book walked through are easy to imagine. A Jesuit library where the catalog is so precise that the ink is almost frightened of being misfiled. A private study with a high window and a walnut chair. Whoever sits there tries the usual rituals, count the characters, mark the most common shapes, flip the pages like a shuffling deck to feel the rhythm. In the corner, a clerk writes labeling notes in Latin, no doubt believing that clarity can be persuaded by beautiful handwriting. Every owner invents the same order of operations. Keep calm. Inventory everything. Decide what the leaves must be. Fail politely. Then pass the codex to the next careful person like a riddle wrapped in an apology. The binding accepts all of this without comment. Marginal hands add the occasional mark that may or may not be a guide and may or may not be a leftover sneeze. A rumor says an emperor once paid handsomely for the odd volume. Another rumor says it belonged to a Prague cabinet of curiosities where the curators introduced it as a conversation piece, neglecting to mention that the conversation was unilateral. You can almost hear the book's patient yawn when someone proposes to solve it before dinner. If you're still awake by the time we begin counting star petals, you can subscribe or just place the phone face down and consent to sleep. I will be here either way, moving my finger along the quiet edges. Homely details are steadier than theories. The vellum, tested much later, falls in the early 15th century with the confidence of a hat hung on the right peg. The pigments are the sort that would have been on a careful scribe's table in that period. The choirs form a logic more or less consistent, like cupboards put up by someone who knew where soup bowls go and where flour should hide. The oddest thing is how natural the writing looks, even to eyes that do not know the language. It travels left to right with a comfortable sway, and letters repeat in families. The pen pauses where it should and moves where it must. A reader's instincts nod, yes, this breathes like meaning, then falter. It is as if you overhear a conversation through a wall. The cadence is perfect. The tune is speech, yet the words keep their coats on and do not stay for tea. Sometimes I like to picture the original scribe doing ordinary things, blotting a page, adjusting the angle of the desk, pausing to look out a window where someone is probably arguing with a mule. Nothing miraculous happens. A day passes. Ink dries. The book becomes a book by doing exactly that. Once you sit with the script, the shapes begin to gossip. There are about 24 main signs, written with the laid-back discipline of a clerk who never loses his pen. The words look like they enjoy being words. Some prefer to stand at the start of a line, others like the middle. A few are shy and choose the end where punctuation would be if punctuation believed in this little world. There are loops, benches, hooks, and the occasional extravagant flourish that could double as a footstool. Token counts behave beautifully. Low entropy patterns glimmer like tidiness practiced as religion. Zipf's law nods off, absolutely reassured. It all suggests a language that enjoys being logical, and yet, when you try to coax any content out of it, the pages are remarkably committed to polite stonewalling. Meaning is present as weather is present. You can feel it on your skin, but you cannot put it in a jar and label it without capturing only air. On some folios, you meet little clusters of star shapes surrounding bathrooms filled with friendly figures. On others, long plant stems rise, each leaf like a biography you cannot read. The labels sit beside them with the serenity of luggage tags on suitcases you may never open. This is the part of the night where we begin naming things purely to keep ourselves company. Scholars subdivide the manuscript sections: herbal, astronomical, balneological, cosmological, recipes. They say balneological in the same tone you might say lavender slowly, because it smells like certainty for a minute. The herbal pages are the most endearing, with roots that end in little knobs shaped like turnips drawn from memory. Some plants nearly resemble survivors from a medieval garden. Others are aspiring asterisks. A stem twists into a bottle. A leaf breaks into a fan. A flower opens and then changes its mind. The star whales are decorated with zodiac signs, except that nothing lines up in the spirit of an almanac you could actually use to decide when to plant onions. The bathing nymphs, steady in their green barrels, sometimes hold conduits that look like pipes from an early municipal water plan. If you show the pages to a modern plumber, they will be politely impressed by the flow rate. The recipe section sinks into paragraphs where the script lulls itself, the way a brook repeats a syllable. Lines march neatly like careful laundry on a dark rope. You turn a page, and the voice continues. As consistent as a clock that never bothers to tick-tock attempts to explain the whole object, multiply the way. Teacups do in old houses. Some propose a cipher, and it is a courteous proposal. The writing behaves like plain text, put through a substitution that fell in love with consistency. But ciphers usually leak in small, forgiving places. A telltale cramp, the misstep of an encipherer who has been awake too long. Here the leak is shy. Statistical tests produce patterns too clean for lazy fraud and too coherent for raw chance. Others say it is an artificially constructed language, something a patient monk might have invented after deciding that vowels and consonants needed a more obedient marriage. The trouble is that the structure grows natural habits. the kind you find in speech that has paid taxes for 100 years. A hoax is suggested, but hoaxes are hard workers with poor attention spans. They sprint beautifully and then forget what they were pretending to be. The Voynich text strolls mile after mile with even footfall. A few minds go loftier, perhaps glossolalia stabilized on the page, or a hidden tongue from a community we have lost to time. The parchment does not object to any of these theories. It offers its soft crackle as applause for everyone. There is also the steganography school, the idea that an innocent herbal is wearing a clever tuxedo, hiding information inside its patterns. People build codebooks the size of slim Bibles, propose tables where a star petal number equals a letter, where the length of a leaf equals a syllable, where bathing tub water levels politely announce a secret. If you listen closely, you can hear the book smile. A tower of word lists is raised, sentence by sentence, nearer and nearer to the roof, not quite reachable by any ladder. Radiocarbon testing anchors the vellum decisively in the early 1400s, making it at once more ordinary and more vexing. We are allowed to remove Renaissance magicians from the suspect list and replace them with anonymous professional scribes who had deadlines and probably preferred soup at midday. The ink chemistry shakes hands with the period as well. Everything agrees with the setting. Nothing shakes hands with the sense in our century the book acquired new attention from machines. Multispectral imaging stroked the pages with gentle rainbows and offered to bring out half-erased strokes. Computers ran the text through language-detecting algorithms that sorted the lines into families. Some clusters looked like related dialects. Some pages behaved as if they preferred each other's company, the way cousins choose a table at a wedding. Decoders produced tantalizing phrases that sounded poetic if you wanted them to, like the first two lines of a dream that never hires a third. Nothing remained stable more than a page or two. It was not malicious. The manuscript simply had a talent for politely asking every solution to try again later. A favorite micro-discovery in the academic literature is that the first word of a line often repeats the second or sometimes mirrors something nearby, like a shy child sitting down next to a friend. Another is that the glyph we like to call bench behaves as though it could carry weight. These findings are like charming pebbles picked up on a long walk. They fill the pocket agreeably. They do not, however, cause anybody to arrive. What to do, then, if a book invites attention but refuses translation? The present fashion is to practice the art of reading around content. Treat each folio like a small town you visit, not to interrogate the residents, but to notice the streets. Measure margins. Trace where the scribe lifted the pen to breathe. Map which drawings crowd the gutter and which leave more air. Add guides in pencil on a separate sheet. Here a double stem appears again. Here a pole holds 3 women instead of 4. Here a zodiac wheel prefers 30 spurs to 31. Some researchers make atlases of the pictures, counting the ridges on a leaf as lovingly as a geologist counts layers in a cliff. The idea is to court meaning by patience, the way you might befriend a cat by sitting still and reading something boring until the cat recognizes the shape of you. Every month a tiny observation arrives that no one argues about, and from these a small village of consensus grows. A calm oath helps. Keep the facts that are sure in one drawer and label them: radiocarbon dates, vellum type, ink composition, codicological structure, the set of repeating glyphs. Keep the best guesses in a second drawer with a green tag, subject divisions, the horoscope theme, baths and pipes, recipes, possibly herbal nicknames. Everything else goes in a third drawer, politely marked, "Do not stare." If you are still awake, this is impressively responsible. If not, this is the perfect paragraph to slide past your closing eyes. We are counting drawers, and drawers are famously restful. Some evenings I add one more promise, remove allowed certainty before bed. It is good for the circulation, like lowering a window half an inch. Tomorrow morning, open the book again with fresh, ordinary curiosity, the kind that moves more by strolling than by sprinting dot. There is a gentle way to touch the pages without touching them. Let the script become a room you can sit in. Not a riddle, not even a problem, just a space with a rhythm. The line length taps out a kind of breath. The glyphs tilt like reeds in shallow water. The illustrations resemble a recipe for a universe made of small comforts. A page of baths whispers civic engineering. A page of whales hums calendar music. A page of plants murmurs a garden where every plant's name was misheard through a wall, but the watering schedule is perfect. You can compare this to modern life without much strain. The way we keep many lists that collaborate but never speak. The way some documents are so clearly written that they cannot be understood unless you are already in the meeting. The Voynich Manuscript is modern in that sense. It communicates organization more than content, commitment more than confession. Now we wander once more slowly across those sections named earlier, letting the rhythm win. In the herbal pages, note how the roots often look like cross-sections of something else. Kidneys, knuckles, ginger, knots of driftwood. Sometimes the roots are entire personalities. The stems climb up just to keep them company. On a late folio, a plant sprouts leaves arranged like spoons in a drawer, and a label stands beside it, wearing its best behavior, ready to be read by nobody. In the star wheels, the months move the way months always move roundly, with polite regularity, while the labels flirt with being months, and then decide they prefer to be themselves. A tiny archer takes aim on one wheel, cheerful and undemanding. In the bathing section, a network of tubes carries pale liquid from basin to basin, as if the book is quietly proud of a plumbing innovation. The women point, lift, step, recline. It is health as a habitual verb. In the recipe pages, lines stack up so matter-of-factly that if the text were readable, it might be boring on purpose. Like the lists you make before a trip, 3 of this, 2 of that, stir gently, keep dry, because sleep appreciates recycling. We can watch some theories circle back like careful satellites. A clever cipher would probably not be so patient across so many pages. A hoax would likely drop a stitch. A constructed language might tell us its rules if we listen long enough. My favorite unhelpful observation is that the manuscript behaves like a person humming a tune accurately for hours without ever remembering the title. Whatever lies beneath the script, if anything, is integrated into the act of writing itself. That is unusual and also ordinary. Anyone with a notebook has done something similar, filled a page with notes carefully, then later realized the notes can only be understood inside the head that made them. The Voynich Manuscript may be a record of that private habit scaled up into an art object. This suggestion is not testable. It is, however, comfortable, and comfort is one of the few commodities that a midnight book can reliably offer. When researchers gather, as people will at conferences with the smell of coffee and recycled air, they compare the nicest failures. A team announces machine translations that almost make sense until the next page interrupts them. A codicologist reveals that a certain leaf was once bound in another location, traveling within the book like a tenant changing apartments. A botanist proposes that a pictured leaf matches something real if seen upside down after a generous lunch. None of it is quite wrong. None is quite it. The manuscript listens, flattered. After a century of this pleasant attention, it has only grown more itself. A while ago, someone noticed that a cluster of glyphs repeats like a suffix in English. Another noted that star labels form families, companionable like surnames in a village. I treasure these findings the way I treasure knowing where the creaky stair is in an old house. It does not make the house smaller, but it allows one to walk at night without waking the cat. If you want a ritual before sleep, you can borrow mine. Place the book on the table in your head. Turn a page so gently that you can hear the vellum flex. Choose a single feature and watch it with the patience of bread rising. Count the number of star points on one wheel. Trace one pipe from source to sink across 3 basins. Find one plant whose leaves repeat exactly 3 times and give it a nickname that no one will ever know. Then allow yourself one pleasing comparison. The script looks like a tide chart. The recipe page sounds like a soft drum. The baths resemble a municipal map for a city with delightful priorities. Breathe in for 4, out for 6. The page never hurries, and neither should we. If you are still awake, you may indulge in a mischievous thought. Perhaps the author designed the book not to be solved, but to train attention. A little monastery for the modern brain. If you are not awake, this theory will keep. It is gloriously unnecessary. Eventually, our night reaches its slowest groove. The candle tunnels down the wax like a miner in a gold cave, and the quill scratches on in a language you almost understand. The way you almost remember a friend's phone number from years ago. The book remains unchanged by the amount of love we offer it, which is a relief. Not everything should react. The vellum cools. The diagrams hold their places as star wheels in little cities of pipes. Even the imaginary librarian who promised to solve it before dinner has forgiven themselves and has gone home. Leaving the manuscript unsolved is not defeat. It is practice in letting a beautiful, pointless thing be exactly that. Careful work without a punchline. Information without an obligation to inform. Calm complexity that asks only for time. If you are still here with me, feel free to save this voice for tomorrow. If you aren't, the book and I will keep whispering to each other at a volume designed precisely for sleep. You might not expect the hour hand to have a biography, but it does, and it walks with a very small stride. Imagine Noom as a shy animal that used to live in every town separately, coming out when the sun stood highest over each particular steeple. Somewhere a church bell would test the sky, and a baker would nod because his shadow had finally stopped pointing at the flour sacks. Elsewhere, a fisherman, entirely satisfied with a different noon, would reel in a line and decide it must be time for bread. The sun gave out local times like a kindly aunt handing cookies to each child in turn. No 2 cookies were the same. No one complained because the distances were large and shoes were slow. If you're still awake by the time we quietly wander into real timetables, you can subscribe if you like or not. The hour hand will forgive either way. In the early 19th century, towns had their own clocks, and those clocks had their own moods. Bristol ran about 10 minutes behind. London because the sun lingered differently over the Avon. Bath was not Bath without an extra minute or so of steam. Farmers lived on sunrise and browse time, and even the lawyers could be persuaded to meet whenever their hourglasses consented. The postcoach lumbered along, and the driver consulted a watch that owed more to habit than astronomy. If he arrived late, he was conceptually on time for where he currently was, which is the sort of excuse a universe can tolerate when horses do the hauling. Then rails drew straight lines where roads had meandered. Iron made distances sulk. A train could eat miles before a town had the courtesy to move its clock. The first timetables were charmingly chaotic. A departure might be promised at 12:07 by London reckoning, but arrive at 12:22 by Oxford's, 12:18 by Swindon's, and 12:15 by a watch that had once fallen down a stair. Station masters wrote small arithmetic on the edges of their minds. Passengers collected minutes like postcards, and some accumulated impressive exhibits. It was possible, though not restful, to leave one place at 12 and arrive somewhere else at 11-50-7 without breaking a single law of physics. Only a law of bookkeeping. Railway companies quietly invented an inconvenient convenience. They preferred one time for all their stations. London time, Greenwich time, the time that lived under a little brass dome in an observatory where men adjusted clocks with a patience that looked like worship. At first, the railways kept this standard time for themselves, the way a writer keeps a private outline and speaks of it as notes. Conductors carried the standard in their pockets. Stations set their new clocks. The towns watched with the calm alarm of people who know the sun does not care. A clock might even have 2-minute hands. The longer one pointing to railway, the stubbier one sulking for local. It was a polite two-headed creature that told you were late in one universe and early in another dot at Greenwich. The mean solar time had already become a quiet celebrity. There were transit instruments, long rooms holding eyepieces and tables, and a red ball on a mast that would drop at 1 o'clock each day when weather allowed. So ships on the Thames could set their chronometers. It was the sort of ritual that looks theatrical to outsiders but practical to those who must not quarrel with longitude. Longitude, after all, is only a polite way of asking what time is it where the map is pointing, and ships that wanted to arrive at ports rather. Then approximations of ports had become quite sentimental about getting the answer right. The time ball's modest plop into gravity gave a city the reassurance of a heartbeat dot in Britain. The shift gathered like drizzle. By the 1840s, railway time was ordinary. By the 1850s, it was official for most purposes. By 1880, Parliament told the sun to wait while the country agreed to a single-minute hand. The sun, which had practiced indifference for billions of years, continued indifering at full speed. When people complained, they could still keep local time on their mantel clocks, a private treaty between them and their rooftops. It was not a revolution, just a reshelving of minutes. The baker kept baking. A small absurdity bloomed on legal notices. All times hereafter mentioned shall be Greenwich Mean Time. Like a librarian stamping the universe across the ocean, the American railroads confronted a continent that was the size of an argument. They designed a new system with lines drawn on maps like seams on a quilt. In 1883, the companies held a day of 2 noons, which sounds dramatic but felt mostly bureaucratic and turned 4 wide threads of standard time across the land. At agreed moments, telegraphs clicked, station clocks shrugged in unison, and a strange calm propagated at the speed of wire. The newspapers announced the event in a tone that was both proud and sleepy, as if a cat had been successfully taught to respect a calendar. The following day, the sun rose exactly as before, but the timetables exhaled and stopped biting. That was the important part. Asterisk, asterisk, once railways had stitched minutes into belts, governments discovered that belts were useful. You could set taxes, courts, meteorological charts, and school bells by them. Laboratories loved the predictability. Engineers built new instruments because clocks had decided to behave. The joke of it is that after all this discipline, noon remained a legal fiction. Mean time is the average of the sun's habits, not the sun itself. The true sun slides a little faster and a little slower through the year. The equation of time sits beside it like a patient math teacher, adjusting the sums. But a fiction, when agreed upon by enough clerks, becomes the furniture of reality. You can put your coffee on it. The global map of time zones came in steps, a waltz of conferences and corrections. In 1884, delegates met in Washington to choose a prime meridian, and boldness failed them in the most soothing way possible. Greenwich was doing the job. Greenwich would keep it. French cartographers sighed in a refined accent and continued to print Paris-based grids for a while. No one stopping them, the world gently not noticing. 12 or 24 zones would have done. 34.5 would also have done. In practice, we ended with bands generally 15 degrees wide, and then carved exceptions shaped like bays. Mountains, egos, and pleasant administrative mistakes. One country placed itself 30 minutes off from its neighbors and has been successfully eccentric ever since. If you keep a world clock, You have met the joy of an offset that refuses to be an integer, and you have forgiven it because it is late at night and the kettle is on dot telegraph. Wires made time travel in one direction toward agreement. A crisp pulse from an observatory could decide more minutes in an hour than a bishop could persuade on a Sunday. The rate of exchange was reliable, one electric tick for one universal nod. In city squares, specially generous clocks would display the time for everyone, and people would pause to accept it without paying. The earliest radio broadcasts sent hourly time signals that sounded like a polite spoon on a glass. In a world still rearranging furniture after the 19th century's very thorough redecorations, the shared minute hand became a comforting piece of the room. Every standard breeds its pet rebellions. There were small pockets of resistance where noon preferred to keep its old face. Local almanacs muttered. A few towns kept dual clocks longer than fashion strictly required, and a gentleman might insist on meeting you at God's time, the precise hour at which the sun makes its decision about him personally. But the train was not a theological animal. It responded best to arithmetic. Schedules grew plainer, connections less vindictive, and the most dramatic effect of standard time was that drama stopped happening on platforms. When trouble declines, civilization is pleased. It is easy to forget how young accurate time is. Marine chronometers became reliable only in the late 18th century. Good pocket watches belonged first to people who had pocket watch incomes. By the time zone era, a clerk could own a watch that kept faith with Greenwich across days and weather. Watchmakers upgraded their modest advertising, adjusted to temperature, adjusted to positions, the horological equivalent of a pastry promising flakiness in 6 dimensions. Shops routinely offered to correct your watch to the telegraph time, which is an arresting phrase, implying that minutes can be morally improved like wayward uncles. The 20th century delivered delights to the minute hand. Quartz oscillators converted the gentle fussiness of vibrating crystals into a rhythm so regular it felt like a lullaby. Atomic clocks stood in laboratories and hummed to themselves so steadily that a second became a specimen, not a rumor. Coordinated universal time learned to count with these instruments, then to stumble kindly whenever the Earth's rotation proved human in its tendency to slow down after large meals. Leap seconds entered like shy guests, once in a while, almost apologizing as they extended a year by the length of a good sneeze. Most people slept through them, an excellent use of the feature. Daylight saving time, which is really calendar saving at the hour level, persists as humanity's favorite seasonal exercise routine. We move the clock forward as if pushing a sofa toward the window. Months later, we pull it back, discover a lost sock, and declare ourselves refreshed. The original arguments about saving coal, synchronizing with harvests, or giving children lighter afternoons are all serviceable, like coats stored on pegs by the door. The actual effect is mainly to remind us that time is a negotiated convenience. Twice a year, alarms misbehave, pets request breakfast at the wrong angle, and someone somewhere shows up to a meeting with a face that says, "The universe played a small, very polite prank on me." On maps, the ziggurats of time zones stack against the geometry of nations. Spain wears Central European time, even though the sun would prefer it didn't. China fits the entire sweep of mountains and deserts into a single zone as if tidying a drawer. At a certain border, an insignificant road sign informs you that all the minutes have changed their socks. The ocean zones, those patient dashed lines, do as oceans do and keep to a different logic, pleasing to navigators and largely irrelevant to everyone who measures waves only in holiday units. The poles are circles of amicable chaos at a research station in Antarctica. Scientists choose the time of the country that flies their groceries in, which means noon arrives whenever the logistics staff say it does. Asterisk, city life rests on standard time like a cat on a warm laptop. Electric grids schedule their yawns. Stock exchanges choreograph dances whose steps are coffee, clicking where coffee, and a bell that always rings precisely when it says it will. Garbage trucks leave their garages at a time so early that it feels hypothetical. Buses pretend to keep schedules and sometimes do. Without the coordination, morning would be a very long hallway where everyone apologizes forever. Instead, the elevator doors open on cue. The meeting with 3 time zones appears on your calendar with a small arithmetic attached. A relative in another hemisphere calls you tomorrow, which updates to now in a routine miracle. The countryside remains quietly bilingual. Gardeners still check the angle of sunlight with a competence older than clocks. Animals collaborate politely with feeding routines, except when they don't. A rooster will shout when his personal astronomy requires it. Cows will negotiate milking time with a philosophy that places consistency above legislation. If you stand in a field and ignore your watch, the sky will give you a generous and slightly approximate reading of the hour. This is both unhelpful for catching trains and extremely good for the heart. For scholars of time, the footnotes are where sleep collects. Most railway companies produced enormous rule books specifying which clock ranked above which, who was allowed to set hands, and how many minutes of slippage were to be tolerated before somebody telegraphed somebody else in italics. Telegraph operators in some towns were honorary clockkeepers. Their job included literally giving people the time, like priests of the quarter hour. The genres of mistakes became standard too. Misconnections, misprinted tables, clocks that continued to tick through fires they did not deserve. If you ever read a timetable from 1850, you will meet a literature that uses numbers to soothe anxiety. Even the words we use change their furniture. Second grew an engineering backbone. Minute changed from smallness to unit. A clock stopped meaning of the bell and became of a standard. Noon's personality blurred. Midnight, which had always been dramatic, became office-friendly. The difference between 5 past and 5 after remained a charming dialect war in English that both sides won, because the minute hand does not care who speaks first. Somewhere a poet wrote that time is a river. The timetable replied that it was a grid. The Soviet Union once experimented with decree time, adding an hour to the entire country for economic reasons, the way a person adds soup to make guests feel welcome. Decades later, the policy retired, then returned, then adjusted again. An example of how minute hands can serve as barometers for ideology. Iceland decided that coordinating with neighbors is for continents and stayed sternly on Greenwich time through very luminous summers. Nepal, with admirable independence, keeps you TC 545, as if to demonstrate that a quarter hour is a valid emotion. These choices do not ruin the world. They give it character, like slightly mismatched tiles on a kitchen wall. If you want to imagine the most soothing moment in the story, picture a telegraph operator on the day of 2 noons. He stands in a small room with a clock on the wall and a paper timetable on a nail. He knows, because he has been told repeatedly, that at precisely the appointed second, a signal will slide into the wire and announce the new standard for his zone. He is not moving nations, only a minute hand. When the click arrives, he reaches up and corrects the clock by a small kindness. Outside, a passenger waits on a platform and becomes unnecessary 3 minutes less annoyed. The train leaves. The field beyond receives it calmly. No heroics. Only the quiet normalization of a habit. By now your own clock may have drifted the width of a breath. That's normal. Most devices compromise between accuracy and domestic harmony. Your phone consults a network time server with serene frequency. Your kitchen oven maintains an independent foreign policy. The clock on the microwave advances faster than the rest because it enjoys being slightly ahead in life. At New Year's, the time signal on television counts loudly, but your neighbor's fireworks observe a looser arithmetic, interviewing the night at irregular intervals. At airports, giant boards whisper times in two languages, the one you experience and the one the schedule believes in. Every so often, a newspaper suggests abolishing daylight saving time, or abolishing time zones entirely, or skipping leap seconds because they frighten computers. These are entertaining proposals and would have cosmetic benefits, like repainting a fence. People who travel across zones often adopt personal strategies. Some keep their watch on home time, a small act of loyalty to the kitchen table. Others flip immediately to avoid calling a colleague at 4 a.m., which is courteous. Pilots, nurses, and programmers keep quiet calendars divided by offset, living proof that human brains can stack minutes like plates without dropping too many. What endures is the gently absurd idea that the planet can wear a grid that fits. It does not really, but the fit is good enough to allow a concerto of buses, bells, logins, wakes, naps, lunches, treaties, and naps again. The principal discovery of standard time is that people relax when their expectations are synchronized, the way a choir breathes together before the first note. We do not need the note to be perfect. We only need to begin together. If you want a final image before sleep, look at a town square after dark, somewhere with a clock that glows above a bakery. The clock says it is slightly after 10. Somewhere in the same zone, a lighthouse agrees. A factory gate agrees. An astronomer who knows the difference between mean and apparent time smiles and agrees for practical purposes. The moon, uninterested in compliance, arranges shadows according to its partnerships with oceans. A cat crosses the square with a schedule of 1. A bus sighs and departs exactly when its timetable promised, and then immediately forgives everyone for not noticing. And if you are still awake, consider the modest triumph that you can arrange to meet a friend tomorrow at 11 and both arrive at roughly the same moment. Even if you live in cities that speak to different oceans, the world had to build observatories, drop time balls, train clerks, draw zones, teach machines to hum, and convince bakers that the shadow on the flour sacks was negotiable. All of that effort so that two people might share a minute. The minute will pass, of course, in the dignified way minutes do. But while it is there, it holds the door gently, and you walk through it as if you had always known how. By morning, your clock will still be correct enough. The sun will continue its large, complicated sentence. Somewhere a laboratory will consult an atom and decide that a second is still what it was yesterday. Somewhere else, a sleepy station master will set the platform clock by a signal that travels invisibly through walls. Noon will visit your town at the appointed minute, not because the sky insisted, but because the timetable politely suggested it. You can nod when it arrives, or you can let it pass without greeting. Either way, the hour hand will keep its biography to itself, and you can drift calmly inside its quiet stride. You might not expect a small book made of old calfskin to keep so many people politely baffled for so long, but here we are, tiptoeing into a room where a codex rests like a sleepy cat on a windowsill. The vellum whispers when you turn it, the way dry leaves murmur to each other in late autumn. You can imagine a chest being opened in an Italian college at the start of the 20th century, dust lifting like dandelion seeds, and a bookseller with a soft, careful grip lifting out a bundle tied with unromantic cord. The pages look clean in that paradoxical way that only very old things can look clean sturdy, pale, slightly glossy, ready to pretend they are straightforward. In the margins, there are stars that look like wheels, women bathing as if they have the patient schedule of medieval water, plants that are confident about being plants without committing to any botany, you know. The spine gives a tired sigh. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. I'll never know. The book won't either. It seems determined not to notice anything we do. The first habit to pick up with this little codex is the slow blink. You glance down at the script and blink, and the letters remain calm, as if you are the one with the strange alphabet. They arrange themselves in tidy lines from left to right like a well-behaved schoolroom. Loops, stalks, comfortable benches of ink, tall letters that stand like steeples. Small letters that sit like monks on simple chairs. They do not trip or smear. They flow. You will be tempted to think, oh yes, this is a language behaving itself. That is an understandable temptation. The ink says everything is fine. Please carry on. Nothing to see here. Vowels have been provided. You notice there are no dramatic corrections. No nervous crossings out. Whoever wrote this was either very sure or very stubborn. Between the leaves, you hear a story about a bundle found at Villa Mondragon, and about Wilfred Voynich carrying it into a new century, and about conversations in auction rooms where the book sits innocently. The way a cat sits innocently next to a broken vase dot, there are familiar, bibliographic rituals you can do while the air grows quieter. You can hold the book close and breathe in the mild scent of protein and patience. You can check the choirs and catch how the gatherings fall like steps in a staircase. You can admire the care the parchmenter took, smoothing the skin until it felt like the soft side of a seashell. Scholars with useful machines later take fragments no larger than a breadcrumb, weigh them with the seriousness of pharmacists, and agree that the animal died somewhere in the early 1400s. The ink lounges comfortably on that date, not hurrying to be earlier or later. If a century has a middle, this book enjoys sitting right there, legs dangling, humming nearly wordless songs. A polite fact arrives. Old parchment. New questions. Someone coughs quietly, as if they've remembered an appointment with the unknown. Once you see the drawings, the pages stop pretending to be ordinary. Everywhere you look, a plant performs a demonstration of leaf-like behavior without reciting any name that would satisfy a herbal. A root decides it is better as a bottle. A stem becomes a little ladder. A flower opens like a friendly secret you can't verify. Around them, pages bloom into star wheels where zodiac signs parade like actors on a stage no bigger than a dinner plate, each with a tiny changing room lined with minuscule writing. And then, almost comically domestic, women wade through green baths that join and loop in ways that violate the plumbing code of every century. They carry stars like bath toys. There are barrels and pipes and little pools with walkways, as if the universe built a spa and then forgot to schedule the steam. It is not clear whether the water is healing, astronomical, or simply available. If you have ever stared at laundry swirling in a front loader and thought, cosmology, you are at home here. The writing keeps its tempo regardless. The words, if they are words, collect into families. Certain shapes prefer other shapes the way time prefers tomatoes. A mysterious glyph likes to open the wine. Another settles at the ends as if it were punctuation doing community service without the legal authority. Statistical people show up with coolers of numbers and report in their reliable indoor voices that the distribution of word lengths looks normal, that frequencies behave as if they belong to language and not to chaos. It is like meeting someone who has memorized how to nod in conversation and executes it perfectly for hours without once saying anything you understand. Zipslaw gives a small, approving nod, as if it recognizes a cousin. And yet, no one finds the dictionary. The book is like a neighbor who always carries a bag of groceries, but no one has ever seen eat. This is the moment when theories, like polite guests at an open house, begin to take off their coats. The first guest says, clearly it is a cipher, a clever one, perhaps by a courtly brain that liked puzzles more than gardens. The second guest says, but look, a cipher would slip now and then, and this one never stumbles, not even where it should stub its toe. A third guest suspects a con, a medieval hoaxer paid per page, or a modern one winking back through time. The The fourth notices that hoaxes age poorly. This one is aged like a well-made chair. Another guest wonders whether the text is a constructed language no one else got the memo about, a kind of private Latin with some agreeable quirks and homemade vowels. Across the room, a quiet person says steganography and looks satisfied, as though the images themselves have swallowed a message. If only the plants would confess. Everyone agrees that if meaning lives here, it is a landlord with excellent locks. Machines arrive and do what machines do when invited to a party with vellum. They shine multispectral light at the pages and coax out faded strokes, as if encouraging pen ghosts into conversation. They separate pages into dialects, call them A and B, based on the shapes that show up more often, like regional pastry preferences. They try to translate by force of mathematics and produce sentences that have the texture of soggy crackers. Still, the numbers keep returning to their first observation. This behaves like language does when language is not feeling theatrical. Low entropy, tidy repetition, neighborly patterns. If a text could make small talk, this one would be excellent at it. And yet, the moment you lean in, it smiles and changes the subject to bathwater. Some scholars do not chase keys anymore. They study how to read a book that might never speak. The method is gentle and very reasonable. Map the pages by neighborhood. Purple pages here, cosmology there. Balneological bits in another district altogether. Note which labels cluster around particular leaf styles. Mark where the tubs are connected by little green aqueducts. Count the stars that ride inside scalloped shells. Trace the way a certain jar repeats its modest shape like a well-loved teacup. If the script cannot be translated, its choreography can be. A reader can watch how motifs lean toward each other, how a form of leaf, a curve of water, and a certain glyph in the marginalia nod in the same rhythm as if sharing old gossip. The result of this mapping is not a eureka. It is a bedtime chart. You discover, for instance, that some zodiac wheels host unfamiliar months like patient cousins, and that the nymphs who wade among the pipes prefer to congregate in clusters that could be pipelines or family reunions. You learn that recipe sections march in neat jar-lined files, and that the script there becomes slightly more repetitive, as if the pen too were measuring ingredients with a calm spoon. You learn to suspect that meaning may be organized not by grammar, but by habit. It is like understanding a city not through its street names, but through the smell of bread in late afternoon and the direction of the laundry lines. After a while, the pressure to solve collapses into the comfort of knowing where things tend to be. There is a kindness to reading this way. You set aside grand explanations and touch the book with that soft fingertip reserved for ripening fruit. Dates and inks become companions instead of suspects. The early 15th century vellum sits, untroubled, while the world around it brings more wars and better coffee and many tired conferences. A curious person can spend an evening with 24 pages and come away feeling richly ignorant, which is an underrated sensation. One can even craft a household rule. Keep 3 certainties only: what the book is made of, when the skin once lived, and who brought it into modern daylight. Allow a 4th certainty if you were feeling brave. Whoever wrote it knew exactly how to draw without leaving a forwarding address. Now and then someone confidently announces that they have cracked the code in a weekend with a spreadsheet and a hopeful headline. It is always a pleasant time. Coffee is poured. Letters are mapped to letters. Plants are assigned to plants. The zodiac is aligned with ambitious dates. The translation reads, approximately, like a recipe for a soup where the main ingredients are hope and generic herbs. On the next page, the same system produces something like very good bath for the liver. Also, the stars. It is hard to be sure whether the bath cures the liver or the stars. That is the beauty of it, ambiguity with good posture. The book has turned being unhelpful into a social skill. The longer you linger, the more the manuscript encourages a wider, softer view. Medieval books often had practical ambitions. Herbal texts listed plants to recognize, not to philosophize about, and zodiac diagrams coordinated with calendars for uncontroversial chores like bloodletting, which was once as routine as changing a tire. The Voynich Manuscript borrows the costumes of usefulness, a recipe section, a herbal, a set of month wheels, and rearranges them the way a child rearranges a cutlery drawer, ending with something that glints and clinks and does not set the table. It is somehow both earnest and unserious. It is the friend who brings a toolkit to help fix your shelf and then spends 3 hours happily organizing the screws by color. There is a polite joke in the vellum, and it never grows old. The joke is that the book is not actually a riddle. We have simply walked into a room where the conversation has been going on for 600 years, and everyone is speaking an inside language that is not aimed at us. If we stopped trying to respond and instead settled into the chair, we might notice the warmth of the wood, the way the afternoon light catches the gulf of a letter, the small repair at the corner where a binder once breathed and thought about supper. We might notice that we are, in fact, reading, just not translating. We are reading the attitude of the hand that wrote without crossings out, the confidence of the painter who shaded leaves in sleepy green, the schedule of the scribe who paused for a breath after certain loops. We are reading a tone of voice. This approach, call it affectionate cataloging, makes room for one more gentle amusement. You can run small experiments that feel like tending a garden. Count how often a particular glyph opens a line in the herbal pages, and how often it opens a line in the recipe pages. Notice that it behaves like a doorman in one district and a roomer in another. Trace the micro-architecture of a certain bath where the pipes connect in a triangle that reappears 2 gatherings later, like a melody remembered by the unhurried. Watch how stars migrate from the borders into the rooms, as if the astrologer rented out storage space to the apothecary. You do not solve anything by doing this. You cultivate familiarity the way you cultivate mint carelessly, and soon it is everywhere, and you are content to keep trimming it. At this point, you might be peacefully wondering who once held the pen. Was it one person with a steady afternoon schedule and an appreciation for tidy benches of letters? Were there 2 hands, one slightly more fond of tall strokes, the other indulgent with loops? Experts debate because that is their job and their pleasure, and the manuscript tolerates their attention the way a cat tolerates 3 people discussing the correct name for its color. You can imagine a scriptorium that is not quite a scriptorium, a cupboard that is not quite a laboratory, a table where plant specimens sat next to jars of paint and the steam of hot water. Or you can imagine a single, careful person, the kind who keeps neat lists and enjoys copying them out again to feel their order run through the fingers. So the book becomes a kind of company for the deliberately drowsy. You spend an evening with it the way you might spend an evening sorting buttons, discovering that some are almost but not quite the same size. You learn that the pleasures of unsolved things are reliable. The world has a sturdy appetite for answers, but your pillow does not. It prefers the sound of a quill passing steadily through line after line, and the way your thoughts loosen when nothing urgently requires a conclusion. If meaning exists here, it will remain politely seated while you fall asleep. It has been waiting a long time. It knows how. Before you drift, you can make yourself a small oath, the kind that suits a bedside table. Keep the facts you have, vellum from the early 15th century, ink that sits warmly at home on that skin, gatherings that have survived journeys through libraries, and the occasional fashionable theory. Add one more. The drawings are charming, whether or not they correspond to anything outside themselves. And one last comfort. Tomorrow, if you are still curious, you can return to the same page and notice something no one else has bothered to name. Like a tiny tick in the stem of a plant, or a star that looks as though it has been reheated. This kind of scholarship asks very little and gives a quiet lot. The candle in our imaginary room has been tunneling down into a small golden cave of wax for a while now. The air is a little cooler. The vellum does that crisp, papery creak that feels like a yawn. If you listen closely, you might hear the sound that statistics make when they decide they have contributed enough for the evening. The manuscript continues to be itself with admirable consistency. It lets theories brush past like coats in a hallway and keeps the low, soothing rustle of a book that doesn't mind being misunderstood. Somewhere between the jars and the star wheels, between a root shaped like a bottle and a bath shaped like a constellation, there's a space perfectly sized for the mind to idle. Leave the page there and leave the question there, and let the quiet keep turning its small, patient loops. You might not expect a book to whisper with diagrams of plants that don't exist, or with alphabet loops that look confident and yet never once say hello, but the Voynich Manuscript does exactly that, very quietly. It sits there like a guest who nods and smiles and speaks in invented etiquette, and after a while you start to mirror its calm. The vellum is old, the voice is undecided, the ink is brisk and businesslike. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. I'll never know, and the manuscript certainly won't tell me. It is very good at not telling. It has been practicing for centuries. Imagine a trunk opened in a villa on a soft Italian afternoon. There's a smell not dramatic, more like a desk drawer that remembers cloves. Someone lifts out a small codex, less than half an arm long, bound in tired calf. Its pages whisper dryly. The drawings are busy but oddly relaxed. A greenish plant that has seen other planets, a star wheel that never touches the same star twice, small tubs of water where very calm figures appear to bathe, as if spa days were invented in a language nobody spoke. By the time you reach the middle of the book, you've learned the texture of vellum by ear. It crackles like a polite fire. You think you see a leaf you've seen before, but the roots have braided themselves into bottles. The book enjoys repeating itself with differences, like a person who tells the same anecdote at every dinner and always adds a new street name. For a while, the manuscript belonged to a bookseller who knew a good mystery was like good wine, best sold with a story and a label, preferably Latin. Wilfred Voynich walked with the book into the 20th century, and the book, unruffled, walked back with him into the 15th. Radiocarbon later confirmed that the pages were early 1400s, which is the scholarly of saying the manuscripts were young when paper was still the new kid at school. The ink sits slightly, not too much, like a coat that fits well enough to wear to mass but not to run in. There may have been Jesuits at some point, or an emperor. It's whispered both ways, as whispers usually are. Each owner did what owners do. They cataloged, they compared, they guessed. They gave up, they passed it on. The manuscript turned another leaf and acted surprised. There is marginalia here and there, not sure of itself. One hand writes in a language we can read and then stops, like someone approaching a pond at night and deciding it is too cold to go in. Another hand adds a mark in a different script. You can almost see the shoulders shrug. A page corner is annotated with a weary tone familiar to all librarians. This is interesting. Please place it back properly. The binding loosens. The binding is tightened. A plant is colored in, perhaps later, perhaps by someone who believed green deserves encouragement. Nothing is definitive. Even the small holes in the vellum where hair follicles once lived are undecided about direction. The book refuses to hurry. It keeps its own tempo, which is nearly the tempo of breathing. The text is the drama that refuses to be dramatic. About 24 shapes, gracious in their persistence, form words that never once demand an exclamation point. They look like they know what they are doing. Some letters have hats. Some letters enjoy long tails. Lines move left to right as if on an afternoon stroll, never colliding, never pausing for punctuation. There are paragraph stars, tiny flower-like markers, that behave as though a sentence has earned a little rosette for conduct. When you scan a page, you see regularity without a plan, like rows of cabbages tended by a patient gardener who forgot what soup is. Entropy tests whisper that this is probably a real language, statistically speaking, but meaning stays behind a door. It rattles the handle just enough to keep you interested, and then goes for a walk. The pictures behave similarly. The plants are nearly right, like dreams that came to the exam well prepared and failed to show their work. Leaves are shaped as if they remembered someone describing an oak to them once, in a hurry on a windy day. Roots become glass bottles, which is not standard botanical behavior, though admittedly roots have their secrets. Zodiac wheels spin around small rooms where unclothed figures stand in tubs that connect to plumbing systems never approved by a city council. It is all very soothing. The nudity does not notice itself. A few pages later, jars line up in neat rows, like students at a graduation where the diplomas are recipes, and the valedictorian is a paragraph of careful nonsense. You imagine the scribe satisfied, as if to say, at last, the recipe for something, possibly a soup that makes you immune to Mondays. And then the book continues, undisturbed by the possibility that it has lied. People try to read it, of course. Humans stand in front of locked doors with a kind of evolutionary optimism. One scholar declares it a cipher, another declares it a hoax, but a very competent hoax, the sort of prank that would require monastic patience and a really good lamp. A group decides it might be a private grammar, maybe a rehearsed experiment in linguistic theater, vowels and rules rehearsing backstage while consonants are sent on stage as understudies. Someone else hears a constructed language clearing its throat. The claims pile like carpets in a market. Everyone touches, few buy, and the vendor smiles as if to say, yes, this is authentic mystery, very rare. Look at the stitching. The machines have their turn. We shine multispectral lights in polite gradients. We digitize, we segment. We teach the document to sit for photographs while we give it the skits called algorithms. Computers separate the pages into dialects, which they label A and B, and then, because computers are very tidy, divide those dialects further into scribal hands. The book allows it. A page that was simply one page becomes a neighborhood with addresses. Now we speak of carrier A and carrier B as if talking about train lines you can take to the Garden District. The book waits. Zipf's law knocks. Common words should be common, and rare words should be rare, and the Voynich has the decency to obey. Low entropy nods along. Word shapes repeat like family recipes, and yet meaning does not arrive. It sends a postcard that says, "Wish you were here." A special kind of translator tries next. This kind uses statistics the way a baker uses flour sifted, heaped, very calm. They say, with modest confidence, that vocabulary clusters by topic the way any sensible language does. Certain pages prefer star wheels, certain pages prefer baths, certain pages prefer roots and bottles. Other pages are shy about preference and try a little of everything, like those buffets where pudding sits near salad. Sometimes the translation machines produce English or Italian, or a thing that looks like a small dog of Latin pulled on by a very long leash. But then the English collapses on the next page and the leash leads nowhere, and the dog is possibly a cloud. The manuscript doesn't gloat, it just turns the leaf again amiably. An anecdote that will not help, at least once. A scholar was sure a single word named a specific herb, and the plant drawing on the page did not disagree very strongly. There was nodding. A footnote was written. The book thanked them by continuing to disagree on all other pages. Another time, a reader looked at the zodiac pages and announced, with the confidence of a person holding a cup of coffee and a certainty, that the small stars hinted at birth charts. A second reader looked at the same stars and announced that these were probably spa schedules. Both were satisfied for the afternoon. The manuscript took neither to court. It is tempting, so tempting, to declare it the work of an apprentice prankster with a ceremonial quill and a free winter. But the repetition across hundreds of pages argues otherwise. Consistency is surprisingly hard to fake. Hoaxes usually forget their own handwriting somewhere around page 40. The Voynich never does. Its alphabet is a small town whose zoning laws are consistent even through economic downturns. The shapes behave, make friends, and never steal bicycles. If it is a hoax, it is a generous one, generous with time, with labor, with concentration. Generous hoaxes are rare. They usually reveal themselves because the hoaxer gets bored and adds a dragon. There are no dragons in the Voynich, only good posture. You can, if you like, think of the manuscript as a carefully tuned musical instrument. The strings are there, the bridge is there, the resonance is correct, and yet the notes do not map to the songs, you know? If you're still awake and you enjoy this kind of midnight instrument, you can subscribe to hear it again on another night. If you're not awake, don't trouble yourself. The instrument is happy to play to the shelves. You can even imagine the scribe humming gently as they wrote, the way people do when the work is pleasant and the rules are their own. The quill taps, lifts, taps, a flourish lands. A small star marks a paragraph because the paragraph behaved well and showed its work. Reading it without reading it becomes a method. You call the sections herbal, astro, balneological, pharmaceutical, recipes. You keep the categories neat, like drawers labeled in a clear hand. You trace parallels the way a sleepy naturalist might trace rivers on a map. This route reappears. That star pattern rotates in a familiar way. This bath connects by a pipe to that bath, as if the page were a hand-drawn plumbing code. When an image of jars appears again, you tip your head, not in triumph, but as a librarian does when a regular returns to the desk. You notice that some pages appear to be text only, as if the scribe grew briefly tired of drawing elbows. On those pages, the letters seem to lean forward, eager to make up for the absent illustrations by performing more neatly. Vanity may exist even in pseudotext. It is hard to say. The best way to approach the manuscript, if you ask its pages, is as a room. Do not turn the light on. Sit. Let your eyes adjust to the rhythm. Count the repeated words on a line as if they were beads. Feel the way a paragraph narrows like a funnel and then widens inexplicably, as if a thought squeezed through an old doorway and remembered its hat on the other side. When you catch yourself trying too hard, let go. The text is like a cat that arrives when you're discussing something else. If you call it, it hides under a vellum cushion elegantly. On some nights, under multispectral light, erased strokes rise like faint fish in a calm lake. They do not offer answers. They offer the comfort of consistency. You realize the scribe corrected mistakes. Even an unreadable script has typos. That may be the most human detail of all. On another night, you count the tiny holes left by a careless knife in the parchment, and you understand the book as an object of skin, stitched from animals who once blinked at flies. The body of the book was a body, and then it was pages. You breathe in for 4, out for 6, and you realize that the pace of your breath matches the distance between 2 paragraph stars. It is that kind of text quietly metronomic. Theories continue to circle, steganography hiding court gossip, a woman's manual disguised to survive censors, the notebook of a monk who invented an alphabet because soup was not enough, an attempt at universal language, a memory trick turned lifestyle. A recent paper proposes that certain glyph sequences behave like affixes. Another paper proposes that those are merely statistical illusions like shapes and clouds. In the margins of academic journals, the conversation is very polite. The stars in the manuscript do not participate. They are busy being the kind of decorative that insists on having a function and then forgets what that function was. One could decode the text by treating its syllables like recipes for motion. A flourish here instructs you to roll the tongue. A tall gallows letter says, "Please drop your jaw like a drawbridge." In this sense, the text is phonetic choreography. But even if that were true, for what song? The practical answer is the one the manuscript itself prefers. For this song, the slow one, the one you're hearing now, whose refrain is that not everything useful is worth knowing at midnight, and not everything unknowable resists being loved. When you grow patient enough, a gentle trick becomes available. Read the page as a weather report. On herbal pages, the weather is green with a 30% chance of root bottles. On zodiac pages, the forecast is circular with interludes of small baths. On recipe pages, there is a front of lists moving in from the west. Turn another leaf, and the climate shifts slightly but remains temperate. The manuscript refuses extremes. There is no storm season, only confident drizzle. People ask whether a single word has been translated. Every few years, rumors appear this plant, that star, perhaps the word for end. Usually the rumor dissolves because N likes to march in parades in the Voynich, and, if it exists, is a loner. The closest we come to consensus is that some pages cluster around topics the way murmurs cluster near the tea table. Which is to say, we are having a nice time, but we haven't decided what party we are attending. So you develop your own etiquette for the unread. Keep facts in one jar. The vellum dates to the early 1400s. The pigments look ordinary for the time. The marginalia are later hands. The baths are content to be baths. In another jar, keep well-labeled guesses, the kind you can remove without breaking the seal. Cipher possibilities, constructive languages, hoax hypotheses. Each week you remove one loud certainty to make room for a quiet observation. For instance, a certain glyph at line endings curls its tail as if pleased with itself. You note it, close the jar, and go to bed. The book is excellent for bedtime because it never resolves. It allows your mind to graze. You think about how the scribe must have sharpened the quill, and whether the knife they used left that small nick near the margin. You wonder briefly why the tabs connect by pipelines that sometimes ignore gravity. You encounter a star wheel again and decide it is probably a calendar for a village that throws parties on very specific Tuesdays. Then you forget that idea, and the page forgives you instantly. If you want a micro punchline to carry with you into sleep, here is one. The manuscript might contain the first recorded workplace complaint about mislabeling plants. A scribe draws a leaf, decides it looks wrong, adds a bottle to distract, then writes a word that only they could read, which probably says fixed. This is not proven. It is soothing. Another. The zodiac page for Pisces might be the earliest technical drawing of a communal bathtub for astrology enthusiasts. Neither fact will help you pass an exam. Both are generous to the night. In the end, and the Voynich prefers that there be no end, you learn to read without translation. The star markers become breaths. The paragraphs become waves. You count rows of jars until the labels dissolve into shape. You trace the loops of letters with your tongue and feel how the jaw relaxes on the gallows glyphs. You imagine the manuscript as a room you can enter with the lights low and sit in, not to discover anything, but to inhabit a very old calm. The candle gutters, the vellum cools. The book remains unread and entirely understood in the way a cat asleep on a chair is understood. Here, present, doing the one necessary thing. If you're still with me, eyes half closed, you may subscribe to hear more unresolved pages on another night. Or you may let the chair accept your weight and the book keep its secrecy. The quill scratches a final line, not because a sentence requires it, but because hands have habits. The tub water does not ripple. The star whale completes a quiet turn. The plant closes its unreal leaves. The page does not hurry, neither do you. The room keeps breathing softly through a script that pretends to be a language, and succeeds instead at being a lullaby written in ink that never needed to be translated to be true.